Living, loving, dying, and healing. What's it all about anyway? And as I thought about this talk, I realized that indeed that is the question of the day. What is it all about anyway? Thanks to coronavirus, it's certainly a question that's on the minds of many people. And I have to tell you, since coronavirus came to this country, I personally have known one person who died, one person who flatlined, but was able to be resuscitated, and one person who was just life flighted to the hospital several days ago. So coronavirus is a big deal. It's a destructive deal. But it's also forced many people to think about life and death and about what really matters, perhaps for the very first time. And that is a good thing. So what is it all about? Personally, I think it's entirely about the journey of rediscovering who we really are in God's sight, reconnecting with our spiritual selves, and realigning our soul with all that is love. But why do we need to come to Earth to go on this journey or to learn these lessons or to figure out how to reconnect? Why can't we just do that in heaven? Well, I'll answer that with an analogy. And sometimes when I use this analogy, I like to talk about camp, but today I'll talk about travel. So I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I love where I live. I love my home. I love everything about it. I love the vistas, the animals, the weather. I love my own bed. I love everything about just being home. But that does not stop me from traveling. Like many of you, I love going to other places and visiting other people. Traveling pushes me out of my comfort zone, and it exposes me to different people, geographies, cultures, and experiences that change me. And they teach me things I just couldn't learn if I always stayed home. But traveling also requires that I expose myself to risks, and most of those are unknown because things don't always go well when I travel. But the things that don't go well are usually the things that produce the greatest learning and are typically the things that become my family's, at least, most repeated and beloved stories. So really, traveling is always a bit of an adventure with potential risk, danger, and fear. But I think that knowing that the adventure is only temporary actually puts it in context. And in context, it turns that fear into really more of an excited anticipation. And I think life is the same thing. I think this journey through life is a grand adventure. Not everything goes well, but we're always able to learn and experience things that are different, or experience them in a different way than we could if we just stayed in our heavenly home. And knowing that we are going to go back to that home, I think puts this life's journey in a context that makes it exciting and gives it great meaning and value. Now, you might ask why I call this a journey of rediscovery and reconnection rather than just discovery and connection. Well, I believe that when we're born, we still remember our spiritual home. We remember how deeply loved we are. And we are loved deeply by the God of the universe. And we are deeply loved despite what we see as our own faults and our own failings. And we remember our God, the source of all love, and we remember the reality of living in that expansive moment of joy. All you have to do is look at a precious baby. I have a brand new niece. I'm telling you, you look at that baby and you know the truth of this, because those babies radiate purity and love, and they radiate joy. And I think they are still so full of hope and so full of excitement for the journey that they're beginning. But then something happens. babies, people, we begin to focus our thoughts outwardly, and we look to the world for answers and identity rather than continuing to look inward for spiritual truth. We discover that love isn't always pure. It can be conditional, it can be manipulative, and it can be abusive. We all become broken in one way or another. We become disconnected from the true source of love. And although we may experience happiness, we no longer live in a state of joy. And in our brokenness, we learn that love can also be used as a weapon to hurt other people or diminish ourselves. And I believe it's only in rediscovery and reconnection with our true home and the true source that we can heal this woundedness, that we can truly experience and reflect real love, God's love, and that we can live the joy-filled life that I believe we are all meant for. Now, fortunately, I think this longing to reconnect with the home we've always known and the love we've always felt remains at our core, regardless of our circumstances. And fundamentally, I think we all want to feel connected, to feel truly bonded and valued and appreciated and respected and supported and encouraged. We also, I think, want to feel compassion and affection and kindness toward others, because those emotions always feel good. In fact, they've been shown to increase the dopamine levels in our brain, which lowers our blood pressure and gives us a sense of euphoria. So I think we're always striving for that. And as we age, I think this sort of longing for reconnection actually starts to become more intense, and it begins to bubble to the surface. And in this process of seeking a reconnection, I think most people discover that God, however you may envision God, is the true source of the love we seek. Because anyone who has had an NDE, and you've heard it from every speaker this entire conference, every person who's had a profound spiritual experience will tell you that God is the very essence of love. Now, sometimes the journey of reconnection can be a lifelong quest with many wrong turns and dead ends, but sometimes it can happen in an instant, like it did for me. I think at the time I was kind of half-heartedly thinking about beginning this journey when I came face to face with the reality of it. In 1999, before I went kayaking in South America, I was a wife, mother of 4 little kids. I was a spine surgeon, and I will say that I was a full member of the, quote, science can't really coexist with spirituality club. And I was also really busy. If I'm going to be honest, I probably didn't feel like I needed to be changed. I had a great life, and I felt like I was a good person. I was honest and ethical and tried to be a woman of integrity. I did take my kids to church, but I think I did it mostly as a way to give them sort of a similar moral foundation. And at that time, if someone had asked me about near-death experiences, I know I would have scoffed, and I probably would have rolled my eyes. And I probably would have suggested that the person telling about it was, a bit out there, a little, woo-woo. I was absolutely a scientist. And if I'd been asked what I thought happened after death, I'm not sure that I would have said much other than, well, I probably hoped there was something more, but I really had no idea what that would be. I really was no different than anyone else. And even though I had dealt with death during my medical training and my practice, I hadn't personally known anyone at that time who had died. And so I'd never really given much thought to the death process or what to expect. But then it happened. One moment I was kayaking with friends on a beautiful river in South America, and the next moment I was pinned under 8 to 10 feet of water at the base of a waterfall in Chile. And Jesus was holding me like a baby, pouring his very life into me. And I was overcome then, and I'm still overcome today by the completeness and the intensity and the purity of his all-encompassing love and I was absorbed into it. And yes, it really was Jesus. Not because I wanted it to be, not because I expected it to be. In fact, I think I was probably as shocked to recognize Jesus as any of the atheists have been who have described meeting him in their own near-death experiences. But that's who it was. And it's one of the reasons that I'm a Christ follower today, because Jesus is always the guy that shows up in profound spiritual experiences. And his words and actions always point toward God rather than toward someone else or toward ourselves. And I think his greatest commandments summarize really what I think it's all about, what I think this life's journey is meant for. And the first one, of course, was, love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, i.e., reconnect with the one true source of love. And the second one, love others as we love ourselves, i.e., remember how deeply loved we are, and then reflect that and share that love with the world. So that was a great start to this. And then Christ took me through a life review that was filled with compassion and understanding and absolutely absent of judgment. Together, I re-experienced many of the most miserable, painful, horrible experiences of my life, but I re-experienced them differently. This time, I had a complete understanding of the me that was within each experience. I understood my past story. I understood everything that had brought me to that moment in time when I either hurt someone else or I was hurt. And I had a complete understanding of the past stories of everyone else involved. I knew their past hurts and sorrows and challenges and disappointments. And I understood everything that had brought them to that moment in time when they hurt me or they hurt someone I loved. And what I discovered is that with that understanding and knowledge of their backstories, all of the destructive emotions that I had previously felt just disappeared. There was no conscious choice to forgive on my part, forgive myself or forgive them. It's just that the hurt and bitterness and remorse and regret that I'd felt in the past and probably was still hanging on to was immediately and completely replaced by compassion and kindness and an absolute compassionate love. I learned in that life review that love really does win, that there's no room for destructive emotion when God's love is present. Just as light overcomes darkness, because darkness only exists in the absence of light, love always overcomes destructive emotion, because destructive emotion only exists in the absence of love. Now, this may seem like a crazy life review or a one-off type of experience, but it's actually something I think we can all relate to. If you think about the times in your life that you discovered your assumptions or judgments about someone else or about some situation totally changed when you actually got to know the person or learned something about their circumstances or actually found out the facts of a situation. Or think about the times when perhaps you've been misjudged yourself. The fact is, we all have backstories. It's just that we can't know what they are. We probably don't even know our own backstory very well. And there is absolutely no way for us to know the backstory of other people. But accepting that everyone does have a backstory certainly helps me, and I think it can help you to feel a very deep, compassionate love for other people, even people who are different or strange or act in a way that is seemingly selfish or hurtful. And I think you'll find that it actually helps you to heal your own emotional wounds. Some of those wounds that might be holding you back from your future, and some that you may not even realize are still festering. During this life review, I was also shown the beauty that came out of each one of these seemingly miserable experiences. And I was shown again and again and again the truth that God always works for our good. He's our greatest champion and our greatest cheerleader. And I was able to see that every experience, no matter how miserable it seemed at the time, was a precious gift. And I was left with an intense gratitude for each and every one of them. Again, this actually is a concept we can all relate to, an experience we've all had. Think back in your life about times when something big either happened or maybe didn't happen that was disheartening or disappointing. Maybe you were dumped by a girlfriend, or maybe you didn't get the job you wanted, or you suffered a life-changing accident. But now when you look backward, you can actually see that that event either allowed you to avoid heartache, led to an even better opportunity, or changed the direction of your life, or maybe it just taught you an incredibly valuable lesson. But there is always something that came of it. Beauty does come. The further in past we look, the more emotionally distant we are from the event, and the better able we are to see the beauty and the benefits that came of it. But in our own lives, we can see the truth of that promise. And then my spirit separated from my body as the current sort of sucked my body over the front deck of the boat. And I could feel my legs breaking, but I had no pain. I assumed I was either dying or dead, but I have to say that I never felt fear. I never felt panic. I actually felt pretty good. And eventually my spirit kind of broke free from my body, and I was released to the heavens, where I was greeted by a small group of people or beings or spirits. I never really know what to call them, but I knew that I knew them, and I knew that they had known me and loved me as long as I have existed. And I knew that they were there to greet me and love me. They were radiant and brilliant and wearing these flowing robes that seemed to be woven together with fibers of love. And they were overjoyed at my return. When I was with them, I could also look back at the scene at the river, and I could watch my friends bring my body to shore, and I could watch as they started CPR. And I could hear them begging me to come back and take a breath. But despite having had a great, great life with a wonderful husband and 4 little kids who I love more than life itself, I found that I had no desire and no intention of returning to my earthly life. I have to admit, I do feel some guilt in saying that now, but the truth is that I was so overcome by the feeling of being home, finally home, after my long and arduous journey to Earth, that I wanted to stay. I wanted to sleep in my own bed. And I knew that my loved ones on Earth would be fine. And I knew that they would finally come home eventually. And I also knew that I would be there to joyfully welcome them when they did. Now, eventually, the people or beings, spirits who had welcomed me began to take me along this pathway that seemed to exist in the middle of nothingness. There was nothing above, nothing below, nothing to the sides. It just sort of existed unto itself. And this pathway was exploding with every color of the universe and beyond. I don't know, hundreds, thousands, millions of flowers and the aromas of flowers, which is exactly what speaks beauty to me. Other people who have had near-death experiences also describe profound love, and they almost always describe intense beauty, more real than real kind of beauty. But the details, as you know, differ, especially in describing beauty, which you would expect because we each describe beauty differently here on Earth. And I actually think that these differences in the stories actually speak to the truth of these experiences. Because if a near-death experience was only a physiological response, I would expect everyone's descriptions to basically be pretty similar. If you break your arm, I can tell you what your 6-week period of time is probably going to be like. Little differences, but basically all the same, because that healing of a broken bone is a physiological response. Instead, I believe that God presents to each one of us at the time of our death the experience that we will understand, and the one that will speak to us and make us feel known. And for some, that will be beautiful music, while others may be greeted by deceased pets. Even the people with whom I've talked who have had hell-like experiences are always still presented with an experience that speaks to them, an experience that they seem to understand and makes them feel known. For me, the flowers, the aromas, the colors spoke to the very depths of my soul. And we continued down this pathway to the entrance of this great dome structure of sorts. And I knew that this was the point of no return. And I was there for what seemed like, I don't know, many, many hours or weeks. I'm not really sure. Time didn't really exist. But during that time, I had a complete understanding of everything. Not necessarily the divine nature of the universe, but I certainly had an understanding of the divine order of the universe, how it all works, what it's all about, how it is possible that there really is a God of the universe who is real and present today and is connected to each one of us individually. It was mind-blowing, to say the least. And it's something, of course, it's really impossible to describe using our three-dimensional language. Now, I kept trying to sort of jump across this threshold, but ultimately I was told that it wasn't my time, that I had more work to do on Earth, and that I had to go back to my body. So like many people in a near-death experience, I objected. And when I did, I was basically given a laundry list of work yet to be done. And I have to say that really nothing on that list was something I felt able or qualified to do. And almost everything on that list was going to be challenging to me in one way or another, which I suppose really shouldn't have been a surprise to me, since I've already said earlier that coming to Earth is really meant to push us out of our comfort zones and give us the opportunities to learn and experience different things. Certainly one of the most challenging items on my list had to do with the coming and unexpected death of my oldest son, who was a healthy little boy and only 9 years old at the time. And this wasn't just a thought or a premonition, as some people have suggested. I'm a very concrete thinking sort of person, and this list was very concrete. It was meant for a person like me. And the information about my son's coming death was really quite clear. And when I asked the obvious question of why, why my son, I was immediately taken back to my life review, in which I had been shown again and again and again the truth in God's promise that beauty does come of all things. And I was reminded that it's always a matter of trusting what God has promised to us. I'm often asked if we all have laundry lists of work to do, and if God really has a plan for each of us. And my answer is absolutely yes. Even though right now, in August of 2020, with everything going on, it might be very difficult to believe that there is most definitely a plan for each one of us and for the world that is one of hope. So back to my story. So after many hours on the threshold of this great dome structure, I was basically given my to-do list and kicked out. I was then taken back down this beautiful pathway, and I was reunited with my broken body. And some people describe, kind of difficulty or even comical attempts to get back into their bodies, but mine was very simple. I just kind of plopped down on top of my body and laid back, and I was reunited. And there I was on the side of this very inaccessible river in a very remote part of South America. And my friends, of course, were shocked, but, happy that I regained consciousness. But they were just trying to figure out what in the world we were going to do. I mean, I had mangled legs and I just drowned, and we were in the middle of nowhere. And just then these Chilean men sort of just appeared on the riverbank out of thin air, and they never said a word, but they calmly walked over. They put my body on top of the kayak and kind of strapped me to the kayak. And then they, with a couple of my friends, began kind of chopping down bamboo and trying to work the steep hillside. And I have to tell you, we were many, many hours away from any sort of medical services. But after a while, when we finally made our way up the hillside and eventually emerged onto this little dirt road, an ambulance was waiting right there in that exact spot. No one had called for it. In 1999, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have sat phones, and there wouldn't have been anyone to call anyway, because we were in a remote, unpopulated part of southern Chile. But nonetheless, the ambulance was there. And when my friend sort of incredulously asked this guy, what are you doing here? He was very calm. He just merely responded that he was waiting. And other than those words, neither the Chilean men who had helped me get up the hillside nor the ambulance driver ever said anything else. They never expressed surprise. They never asked any questions. And it was as though they seemed to already have known what to expect, that they really were waiting for me. And then they just disappeared. Despite many attempts by my friends to track them down, they could never find any evidence of their existence. So yes, I think they were angels. And I think they were sent to help me and to facilitate the miracle of my return. And I do think it was a miracle. And then I began the very, very long process of returning to the United States, surviving a couple weeks in the ICU, and then undergoing many, many surgeries to repair my broken legs. And during the first couple weeks after my accident, I felt neither here nor there. And remarkably, I experienced no pain despite receiving no medication. I witnessed multiple miracles and had a couple more out-of-body experiences during which I believe I was back in heaven, God's world, whatever you want to call it, with the same intensity of color and beauty and love. In the months of rehab that followed my hospitalization, I began to consider what had happened to me and what I was supposed to do with it. And what's it all about anyway? I desperately tried to find scientific or medical explanation for it all so that I could discount everything I'd been told, including what I'd been told about my oldest son's coming death. I reviewed my medical records. I spoke with everyone who had been at the river and the emergency room. I heard about small miracles that other people experienced simultaneously that I had never known about. And I also read extensively on the physiology of death, drowning, and the dying brain. I read the original literature on every potential explanation I could come up with. I read about cold water drownings, which mine wasn't anyway. I read about dreams, hallucinations, seizures, DMT, and other neurotransmitter trips. I read about delusions and evil spirits. I read about everything. But after months and months of research, I finally concluded that mine had been a real and true spiritual experience, and that it could not be explained by science or medicine. So then, of course, I was left with the so what of my experience, since no experience is valuable unless it creates change. And over the years, I discovered that the change my experiences had created in me was the knowledge, the absolute knowledge, rather than a hope or a faith that God, the God of the universe, is real and present today. And I became reconnected with my spiritual self. And I became realigned with the one God, the one source of all love. And I learned that God's love for us is absolutely overwhelming in its fullness and its completeness and its depth. And I learned to trust that God's promises to us are true, regardless of what my momentary circumstances are or my momentary perceptions. And what I also learned is that choosing to trust those promises is a day-by-day and moment-by-moment action. We are fully known and fully loved. And with this knowledge, this trust, I have to tell you, for me, I feel no regret, remorse, bitterness, anger, sadness, anything for my past experiences and my past choices. Because I know that in God's knowledge and understanding of me, there is only love. There is only kindness, and there is only deep compassion. No matter how badly I think I've blown it, no matter what I think my failings are, God is still there. And I know and trust that beauty does come of all things. So I no longer label experiences and events as good or bad. They just are. The fact of the matter is, happiness cannot be truly appreciated or experienced without sorrow. Pleasure without pain, and even the death of a tree in the forest, provides the nourishment needed by the new growth below. So whether events are labeled good or bad is entirely a matter of perspective. So for these reasons, I'm able to experience gratitude even in the midst of challenging times, because I know that that change and beauty will eventually come. And yeah, my son did die 10 years after my accident. And I'm always asked if I told my husband or son about what I'd been told. And the truth is that I didn't say anything for many years, because I think outside the context of trusting God's truth, I think it would have been a very, very heavy burden for anyone to carry. And I had reasons to think that my son's death would happen before his 18th birthday. And several months before then, I realized that it really wouldn't have been fair to my husband not to tell him what I'd been told. So I did, and I have to say, he didn't thank me for it. But on my son's 18th birthday, when I found him alive, I then poured out the entire story to him. And to his credit, he listened respectfully and didn't tell me I was nuts. And I have to tell you, truthfully, I thought God's plan for my son's life and for our lives had changed. And I sort of began to kind of forget about it and be grateful. But 18 months later, my son was roller skiing, which is a form of dryland ski training. When he was moved to tell his ski companion, his friend, this whole story while they were skiing. And not long after he finished telling her the story, he was struck from behind by a distracted driver, and he was instantly killed. And I have to tell you that I was as devastated after his death as any mother would be. I loved him dearly, and I still do. And I still long for, just one more day with him. My knowledge, my experiences, and my trust did not protect me from sadness or grief. But I can absolutely say, in all honesty, that even on my most sad day, I still experienced great joy, because that is the power of this sort of transformation. I knew that my son had been joyfully greeted. I knew that beauty would come of both his life and his death. And I also know that he'll be there to greet me when my own journey on earth is done. I experienced gratitude and joy in the midst of this very, very deep sorrow, because again, that is the transformative power of trusting God's love and God's promises to us. I also know that I'll go home again one day. So of course, I and pretty much no one who's had a near-death experience has any fear of death. But in addition to that, knowing that I'm going home does bring a context to my life here on earth that I think brings it a focus and brings value every day and gives meaning to every moment. Even love is only meaningful in the context of this greater reality. I also trust that God's desire for me is one of hope and is based in love. So I have no worry or anxiety about tomorrow or what might happen. I know that if my plans for tomorrow don't come to fruition, it's because God probably has something better in mind for me. Usually when I talk about God having a plan for us, I'm asked about predestination or fate, and if that's what I'm talking about. But it isn't. I think if everything were predestined or just a matter of fate, there'd be absolutely no purpose or value in even making this earthly journey. I think our intellectual curiosity is important, and it would be meaningless if our choices held no value. But the fact is, we do have free will, and we have the ability to make choices that matter. I sort of see that, I kind of think about free will as always having the opportunity to choose to do what is best or not. We can freely choose to seek and follow God's plan, the one that's been laid for us, the one of hope, or we can choose to go a different direction. So I'm a river rat. I love the river. So I'm going to use a river analogy to make the point. And it will make the point, I think, about free will. So when I kayak or raft down a river and I come to a set of rapids that are new to me, I always seek the input of the trip leader or the person who has the most experience, or at least the person who has kayaked this particular set of rapids before. And they'll then show me and tell me the best line or the best path to take through those rapids that will turn out well for me. It will be a path of hope, but I have free will. So I can choose to either follow that plan, that path, or I can choose a different line through the whitewater. And if I do choose a different path, you know what? It may still work out well, or my choices may result in more struggle and more problems. Now, here's the other great thing about kayaking. When I am aligned with that best path through the rapids, when I'm online, everything feels great. It's graceful, it's exhilarating, and it's really satisfying. Similarly, when I'm aligned and resonating with God's plan, God's will for my life, it's exhilarating and energizing. So I'm always trying to stay connected and tuned in. I love an analogy that a friend of mine used a while back. It's sort of like changing the dial on your car radio so you can get rid of the static. When the radio frequency dial matches the frequency of a particular transmitter, those radio waves create resonance, and that's what allows us to hear clearly. And I think when we're aligned or realigned with God's will, our soul's frequency matches God's frequency and resonance occurs. When I don't feel resonant, I always try to recognize God's prodding and nudging so that I can get back in sync. And I tend to recognize all those nudges by sort of looking at and evaluating every thought, every prompt, every opportunity through the lens of love, because God's plans always lead to greater kindness, patience, peace, faithfulness, tolerance, goodness, self-control, and joy. A nudge to act inappropriately or in a way that causes harm to oneself or someone else never comes from God. So I talk a lot about trusting God's promises because that was the overriding lesson of my NDE. In choosing to trust, I am choosing to align my spiritual frequency with that of God, the source of all love. And when I am aligned, I am able to fully exist within the reality of each infinite moment, the place where I believe gratitude and joy reside. Now, I will admit, I don't know much about quantum physics or vibrational energies, but I do know that when my joy resonates with the joy of others, it creates an energy that can change the world. So, one of the greatest things I've discovered in the years since my own near-death experience is that this sort of profound spiritual experience is not required in order to achieve this sort of reconnection and realignment with love, this sort of life transitional experience. But it does take some time, and it takes some effort, and it takes a sincere desire to seek a reconnection. Over the years, I've observed that many people who say they want to rediscover their spiritual selves really just want to feel good. They don't really want to spend the time or the effort investigating truth, and would prefer to devise their own spirituality so that their thoughts and choices are never really challenged. But that will not get you to a realignment. That will not get you to joy. The problem is, without a true connection to God or source or whatever name you want to give it, one's newfound realignment won't survive the challenges of life or of death. So I would encourage you, each one of you, this evening, this week that's coming up, this month, I would encourage you to challenge your current thoughts about life and about death and about what happens after death and about God. Go back and actually examine your life story. Listen to the stories and spiritual experiences of others. Open your heart and read the Bible, read other sacred texts, and then evaluate all of this data through the lens of love. And in the end, I believe you'll be able to choose trust. And through that trust, I believe you will experience the same transformation that I have. And you will begin to live the joy-filled life that I absolutely believe we are all meant to live. So may God bless your travels this week and keep you all safe. Thanks for listening.